Good evening, Europe, and welcome to Green Screen. I'm your host, Sam Murray, and over the next few months, we are bringing you a wide range of online film screenings and inviting you to join our debates on the future of Europe, post-COVID recovery, and making our societies more resilient and sustainable. Tonight's theme is food as an essential sector. How do we produce locally and fairly? It was American psychologist Abraham Maslow who posited that food is a physiological need for humans to exist, and that through food we begin a journey to self-actualization. That is the best version of ourselves that we can be. Food is a language through which we can express our cultural identities, our heritage, and our traditions. Throughout the pandemic, farmers, agro-food workers, and those involved in the food supply chain from farm to fork, including those on processing lines, doing packing, truck and train drivers, supermarket workers, have all ensured that we can have access to food. The COVID crisis has shown how we rely on such workers and also allows us to reflect and ask questions about the systems with which we produce food and how local they actually are. As Greens, we seek for sustainability in such systems and a more local approach to food production and agriculture. And it is this discussion we will continue and develop for today. So today's discussion is based on our wonderful film, When Tomatoes Met Wagner, which is the story of two wonderful farmers in Greece and their farm workers who are creating tomatoes in the backdrop of a difficult and economically challenging time. And this film forms part of our Green Screen project, and it is now my great honour and pleasure to introduce the Secretary General of the European Greens, Mar Garcia, who can tell us a bit more about the Green Screen project. Hello, Mar. How are you doing this evening?
Hello, Sam. I'm pretty well, thank you. Very happy to be here, as usual, in this project, this very sweet project that we are experiencing today. So thanks.
I wonder if you could perhaps tell us a bit more about the Green Screen project and some of the motivations and aims behind it.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's a very, as I said, one of the sweetest projects of the EGP. It's a project that our goal is not a huge one. I mean, we just want to talk politics because we are interested on it. So it's just a different way of or a different channel to talk politics. So it's through the cultural sector, and one of the big channels that the cultural sector has is the cinema. So back when COVID hit us, we were all shocked, and a lot of people suffered, but we also have to acknowledge that the cultural sector was one of the sectors that, got the worst consequences. So we decided to, do politics as we normally do, but through different channels. And we initiated this green screening project to have a light conversation over a topic that is of interest of everybody through or after watching a nice and sweet film. So voila, here we are. Today, agriculture and When Wagner Met Tomatoes.
It's such a wonderful film, isn't it? Especially to see those gorgeous points when they're playing music to the tomatoes as well. And I wonder what made you select, this particular film, and why do we need to have a conversation around food and the systems that produce them?
So, I mean, we wanted to talk about one of the essential sectors. I mean, people that have been following on the green screening know already that we've tackled health, we've tackled education. So today we thought that agriculture and food was it's something that impacts a lot on our life, and that has a lot to say about our well-being. So we believe that this was a key sector and where there's a lot of politics going on. So we thought, okay, why don't we just, share this conversation with the people out there, and we find out what is their opinion about it. And we invited this very nice list of speakers today who are very knowledgeable. So I'm sure that we are going to learn a lot about it.
I definitely think we will. And I think also in our discussion of food, we might end up feeling quite hungry because food is just so wonderful, isn't it?
It is.
The film certainly made me. It was quite interesting after the film. I ended up buying loads of tomato-based products as a result. So who knows what might happen. Thank you very much for joining us, Mar. It's a pleasure and a privilege as always to have you with us.
Good. Enjoy the conversation. I'm looking forward to the next one.
Thank you very much, Mar.
Third Thursday of every month. Yeah.
Get that in your diaries. Check out the social media just to get those reminders. Make sure you book that out to watch our incredible films. Thank you very much, Mark.
Enjoy.
Thank you.
Ciao.
And to set the tone for today's discussion, we're going to be starting, as we did last time, with our artistic pill, which is our creative expression that we find on our topic of discussion. And today our artistic pill focuses on the work of French artist Ilan Benatar and his Lost Factories project, which explores the abandoned factories that were once cathedrals of industry, supplying and producing food and other products and services across Europe, now being made redundant by the advances in technology we have in society. So we're now going to enjoy this wonderful artistic spot and look at the work of Ilan Benatar.
Quand on est dans un endroit seul, où il y a juste quelques petits bruits, qu'il y a plein de sentiments qui se mélangent entre la peur, la beauté, la solitude, etc. Et puis après, c'est la concentration en tant qu'artiste, c'est comment je vais arriver à mettre ça en boîte, comment je vais bien montrer ce que j'ai vu. Je m'appelle Ilan Benatar, j'ai vécu pendant 20 ans à Toulouse où j'ai été galeriste. Donc j'ai tenu une galerie d'art pendant presque 10 ans où j'ai vendu de la photographie. Et à côté de ça, je suis bien entendu photographe. Donc je parcours l'Europe et quelques pays du tiers-monde pour photographier des architectures à l'abandon. Lost Factories, c'est vraiment ma passion parce que c'est le bâtiment à l'état brut. C'est le brutalisme architecture, c'est les architectures Eiffel en France. Donc c'est montrer en même temps cette déshérence, en même temps c'est de la délocalisation puisque c'est quand même quelque chose de très fort dans notre société. Pour moi en tant que photographe, tout simplement cette passion de l'architecture simple et brutale et en même temps à l'œil du public ça montre quand même quelque chose de très important. Une incidence grave, c'est qu'on fait beaucoup de choses mais on délaisse. Et on délaisse pas que les bâtiments, parce que quand on délaisse un bâtiment, malheureusement, on délaisse aussi des humains derrière. Donc il y a un côté social aussi. Ces bâtiments, on les laisse, on ne les regarde pas, mais ils sont beaux quand même. Et il y a une beauté, et quand on connaît l'histoire est souvent triste, mais on se rend compte de la chose et ça donne encore plus de beauté à ce bâtiment, souvent. Le côté artistique, pour moi, c'est la prise de vue, en fait. C'est comment je vais prendre la chose parfaitement. Et la lumière, c'est la lumière que je vois. Donc, c'est l'œil et la technique. Et c'est une bonne combinaison des deux qui fait qu'on va ressentir quelque chose ou pas. J'aurais gagné mon pari en réussissant des belles séries photographiques, d'abord, parce que c'est mon art, et en sensibilisant les gens. Si j'arrive à faire les deux, c'est un pari gagné.
And you can find out more about Ilan Benatar's work on his website, and he also, I believe, is on Instagram. And the pictures are just stunningly beautiful representations of how industry is kind of unfortunately seen decline. So I definitely would recommend checking those out. So now we're going to move on to today's discussion, and we have a deliciously rich panel for today's discussion. And I'm delighted to have the following panelists join me in no particular order. We have Thomas Weitz, MEP, who is a co-chair of the European Green Party, also a farmer himself who produces organic honey with, I believe, more than 70 different beehives as well. Good evening, Thomas. How are you this evening? Good to see you. Good to see you. Unfortunately, we can't hear you at the moment because you were muted. So I don't know if you want to just speak.
So hi, Sam. Great to be here. And just came back from Strasbourg, but ready for the discussion.
Wonderful. It's so wonderful to have you with us, Thomas. I'm also going to introduce Geneviève Savigny, who is a farmer and a representative of the European Coordination Via Campesina and the former National Secretary of La Confédération Paysanne. Good evening, Geneviève. How are you?
Fine. Good evening. Pleased to be here.
It's wonderful to have you with us. Thank you for joining. And finally, we have Enrico Somalia, who is the Deputy Secretary General of the European Federation of Food, Agriculture and Tourism Trade Unions. Good evening, Enrico. How are you?
Good evening, Sam. Very good, thank you. Great to be here with you. Thanks a lot.
And thank you all very much for joining us. So to set the scene for today, we're going to have a little look at our film, When Tomatoes Met Wagner. And When Tomatoes Met Wagner is very much a gorgeous film exploring the life of tomato farmers in Greece, making tomato and honey products by hand, sold across all of Europe. And this film is really about how the farmers are facing the realities of an economic downturn and the dominance of the expectations of Western consumers for new organic produce. So before we begin our discussion today, let's have a look at the trailer of the film, which you can go watch straight after this debate if you haven't already through our website. So let's have a look at the trailer.
Ναι, να αλλάζουμε και λίγο μουσική, μην είναι και όλα δημοτικά.
Δεν ξέρω, εγώ με τα δημοτικά παραγωγή έχει τετραπλασιαστεί. Τώρα αν είναι η κλασική πιο καλή, δοκιμάζουμε και αυτό, μισό-μισό. Να βάλουμε Wagner.
Wagner, αυτό. Πού το ξέρεις το Wagner? Άκου θιά, την καρδίτσα δεν υπάρχει περίπτωση να την βρούμε σε αυτόν τον παγκόσμιο χάρτη. Αλλά είμαστε κάπου εδώ.
Τώρα αυτά που συσκευάζουμε σήμερα πού θα πάνε?
Αγγλία.
Αγγλία.
Το φαντάζεσαι ότι μας έχουν κλέψει τα όνειρα? Είναι ντροπή τα όνειρα να στηρίζονται μόνο στην οικονομία. Συμφωνείς?
Αν η οικονομία δεν είναι όνειρός.
Εσένα δεν είναι?
Όχι. Λοιπόν, κορίτσια.
Δεν είναι ώρα για καφέ.
Όχι, μισό λεπτό. Ένα τέταρτο. Σήμερα λοιπόν θα σας διαβάσω μια μικρή ιστορία. Η Λουλουδένια. Μια φορά και έναν καιρό, σε ένα τόπο σαν και το δικό μας, ζούσε μια κοπέλα που όλοι νομίζαν ότι ήταν νεράιδα. Όπου έπεφτε το βλέμμα της Λουλουδένιας, όλα ανθίζανε.
Δηλαδή εκεί μέσα τώρα ζει ο βασιλιάς.
Ναι, εντάξει, αυτή τη στιγμή δεν ξέρω αν είναι μέσα, μπορεί να στα θερινάτο, έχει ζέστη.
1,5 κιλό ντομάτες που δίνουν μόνο αυτό το βράκι. Εντελώς αδιαφορικό.
We don't have the name of the village, we don't have the name of the people, we don't have the name of the tomato. It's not gonna work like this.
Θα δυσκολευτούμε τώρα. Το σημαντικό είναι να το παλέψουμε.
Συμφωνώ.
So you can still catch our film When Tomatoes Met Wagner on our website if you go to thegreenscreen.eu, and it will be available to watch straight after you've engaged with our discussion today. So in the run-up to our discussion, we have been running a few different polls on social media to find out what people think about our topic of discussion. And firstly, we were asking our social media followers, what do they think are challenges in food production? And some of the answers we've had back include large corporations making it difficult for small-scale farmers, the impacts and effects of climate change, food supply chains being a challenge, and also a post-COVID recovery needing to include food and agricultural system change as a result. We also asked on social media, what are the areas that could be improved in relation to food production and the supply chain? And the answers that we've had include government policy, so changing national and multilateral policy, looking at protection that there can be for producers, looking at local food networks, land rights, resilience and sustainability, organic food, and also looking at how we can support cooperatives, model farms, and look at group and bulk buying. And I think all of these topics are some things that our panelists may uncover in our discussion today. And our discussion is firstly going to be framed around the topic of access to quality food and how we can ensure this by sustainable means. So Geneviève, I'm going to come to you first out of our panelists. And if I could start with you, one of the themes that the film explores is having access to local produce for the local community. How do you think we can ensure affordable access to sustainable and organic locally produced food? And are the EU policies that we have around this actually fit for purpose?
Yes, well, I would say to have good quality food, a good local quality food, you need farmers. You need a lot of farmers in the countryside, and you need for that to have access to land, access to the means of production for a lot of farmers, and to protect them. Does the EU policy ensure this? Not quite, I must say. Well, at the moment, there seems to be some kind of awareness raising among the EU policymakers, and they've started to think about thinking more about food policy through the farm to fork policy, which has been proposed last year and which is being discussed at the moment. So they are proposing to make food access to food easier for everybody. At least that's what's written in the document. And then for this to improve the quality of food and to facilitate the production of organic farmer, to increase the area in organic farming to 25% by 2030. So you have different in the vision. There is a will to do better, as far as I see. But the problem is, in reality, so far there is not enough finance to help this kind of farming. There is, and when you come to the common agricultural policy, which is the policy that we have for real then there is not really not enough funding to support organic farming. And even in some countries, it is very low, the amount that you can get to change your farm to organic, to turn your land to organic land, and to keep it organic. So it's two different ways to support farmers, and it's not enough. And it's been really not enough, for instance, in France, although many people wanted to shift to organic farming, for instance, for dairy production, but it was really difficult to have access to support. So I think this is, I would say, it's far from being enough, the situation. And in some countries, it is even worse. You don't have local farmers. So it's very difficult to have access to local food. Then, of course, you have a longer chains, but it's not the same kind of products. And in the film, it is not really local products being sold, but it is also interesting for the local farmers to be able to have these kind of markets.
And do you feel that the farm to fork policies and ideas within this particular strategy are going to address this idea of ensuring that there is more funding and more access to support if people want to have more locally based agriculture? Do you feel that the ambitions are good, or do you feel that they could go further and do more? So that's to you, Geneviève.
Oh, yes. It's always under discussion. There is a discussion for the CAP plans, for the common agricultural plans at country level, and now it is a problem in each country to be able to discuss about how it will be implemented, all the countries have to design a national strategic plan to propose it to the European Commission, and then the Commission will decide if it's good or not, and if it goes in the right direction to have I would say, a greener CAP. But this is all in theory for the moment. It's all a kind of promise that we have. And what we see from the ground for years is that it is very difficult for young farmers to start farming, to find land, to have access to land, and then to be considered as farmers through the different legislation that we have in different countries. Because to be considered as farmer, you need to comply with some conditions, the area and the training and going through various steps. So it's quite difficult, in fact, in the reality. And for the moment, what we see in the budget is really not enough.
Thank you. And Thomas, if I can bring you in next, and building on some of the reflections that Geneviève has said about the lack of funding and the challenges that exist within food systems, I want to ask, is the system through which food is made and produced providing quality organic food in a sustainable manner? And are there actually systemic changes needed in that food production line? And also, how can policymakers play part of helping these production lines be more sustainable?
Well, Sam, that's a rather big question you're asking me here, but let's have a look on the actual food system that we have, which I consider to be very vulnerable. I mean, first of all, it's very highly input dependent. So conventional agriculture very much depends on chemical inputs, on artificial fertilizers, on pesticides, on hybrid seeds that you cannot regrow yourself. So you're actually the whole agriculture production method is very vulnerable, and it's basically the farmers are very vulnerable because they're depending on all these supplies, and then of course it's a system that is globally based on abuse of workers. I would say we're here in Europe trying to produce for world market prices, which is practically not possible if we pay our workers in a correct way, but we're competing on the very same market with Brazil or Ukraine, where an agriculture worker costs like 150 or even 80 euros in Brazil per month. So it's also from that side based on abuse of labor and agricultural workers. And then it's a system that is actually consuming its basic means of production. So I'm talking about soil here, but the way we farm today is destroying the soil. It's causing erosion, it's causing desertification, it's causing saltification of the land. So we're losing tens of thousands of hectares of arable land globally every year. So we're literally destroying the means of production. And I could go into detail when it comes to water, irrigation, and all of that. So also there, it's actually not sustainable at all, especially not if you look in a medium and long-term perspective. And also the European agriculture system is only partly oriented on feeding our very own population, but the so-called successful European agriculture model is very much based on importing millions of tons of animal fodder, which we then stuff into animals within Europe, and then we send the animals alive or in form of meat around on the whole planet, while the stink and the manure and the nitrate stays here. So also there we're heavily import dependent, which we saw actually how vulnerable that system is now in the COVID crisis when some of the supply chains didn't work that well anymore. And last but not least, our agricultural system today and our farmers are very dependent on the retailers and wholesalers. So they're finding themselves in a position that they have no negotiation power anymore. They're getting the prices which are dictated by wholesalers and retailers, where they have no negotiation power. The prices don't care about the production costs. We're having regular situations, especially in conventional farming, where the production costs are higher for a certain time than the actual revenues. And that's why we basically need to support farmers with billions of euros of taxpayers' money. Otherwise, not even the ones that are still there wouldn't be there anymore, and very few big industrial plants maybe running the best landscapes, and all the rest of the land would be rather abundant. So the system is not sustainable at all. And now the question, do we have enough local sustainable food production? That's kind of answered, and the answer is clearly no. What the positive effect of COVID crisis was that people were not traveling abroad anymore. They were basically bound to their region, so they took their bike or they just walked out the house and just looked at their backyards and looked at the forests in the backyards and the fields in the backyards, and people started to wonder, where's my food coming from? And they started to wonder, what does destroy that landscape, and what can we do to change it? So in countries where we have local farmers, where we still have medium-sized, mainly family-based farmers, the increase of direct marketing was incredible. Like, I'm a direct marketer all my 25 years or nearly 30 years, meanwhile, being an organic farmer. I'm a direct marketer, so I sell everything directly to customers, but we were all sold out. And if it's colleagues selling vegetable boxes to the city, whatever, we were all sold out because there was a huge interest to buy locally and to support the local farmers. But as was said already by my former speaker, you need to have these farmers still in place. And in many regions of the European Union, these local farming structures are just not existing anymore. I just came back from Bulgaria this weekend, and in Bulgaria, a normal farm is like starting with 1,500 hectares, going up to 100,000 hectares. And that's not farms anymore, but it's industrial plants. So there, it's going to be a long path to rebuild local, sustainable, environmental friendly supply of food to citizens, even though more and more citizens in the cities review and rethink their way of consumption and are longing for other models, which you can also see in the increase of sales of organic agriculture. But still, I mean, local and organic, this is the solution, because Chile or whatever is not the proper solution either, even if it has an organic label.
Thank you very much, Thomas. And I think it's really interesting how you've reflected on how COVID has actually made us think about where our food is coming from, and to explore those spaces around us in which food might be produced. And I think it leads us on to my next question. I want to bring in Enrico here to really ask what role food and the people who have made food has played during the pandemic, and what have been the working conditions for agro-food workers during this crisis. And also you might want to comment on what Thomas was saying about the fact that the system in which food is produced and globally based on is being abusive towards workers in that sector. I wonder if you had some reflections on that.
Yeah, thank you very much, Sam. And of course, I fully agree with what Thomas said. I mean, if I had to answer to your question, what role they played, agro-food workers, they played an essential role, but not only now. Their role is always essential, and this is what we tend to forget, unfortunately. They played an essential role also during the most dangerous period of this pandemic, at the very beginning, when there were no masks, where we didn't see even a small light at the end of the tunnel. They were there, showing outstanding dedication to their job and really ensuring, together with farmers, of course, but really ensuring that food was available on our table, even if health and safety measures were not fully respected, even if they had to risk their lives, as it happened particularly in the agriculture sector, but also in the meat processing industry. The meat sector became really a vector for the spread of COVID-19. And I think that if you think about the meat sector, but also the agriculture sector, what we can definitely say is that COVID-19 cast new light on some of the long-standing and systemic issues that we face in the sector, in terms of precarious employment, in terms of low wages, lack of social security coverage, workers that became infected by COVID and didn't know if they had sick pay or not, and they didn't know if they could go to the hospital or not, or ask for sick pay and sick leave. So I think in general, the COVID-19 pandemic really must be a wake-up call for the EU institution and national governments, really to rebuild the sector, to show a new vision for the sector, which must be a sustainable one, also taking into consideration social consideration. And this is really, really important. There cannot be any just transition This is a term that is very much abused at EU level, but there cannot be any just transition to sustainable food and farming system without decent work. And this is something that we really want to insist from the trade union side, because we are not seeing the right response at the moment from the European Commission and also from national governments. I think social conditionality in the common agricultural policy was a first important step, and the Greens have supported this as well, but we really must to do much more to ensure that the agriculture sector and the food sector becomes really truly sustainable in all the main dimension of sustainability, including, of course, the social ones. And to achieve that, we need to act on several levels. Of course, we need to act from the social policy aspect, labor law. We need to increase wages. We need to increase collective bargaining. We need to ensure the respect for the right to bargain collectively, the right to organize. We need to ensure equal treatment, because this is a sector that relies a lot on mobile and migrant workers, many undocumented migrant workers that cannot really even denounce any violation of their rights without risking deportation. We need to improve accommodation. We have workers that wake up every morning and they go to the field, and when they come back, they go to informal settlements in some parts of Europe. But these informal settlements, you can find them in the Madonlada region, in the Foggia region in Italy, but also in the south of Spain. These are really situations that shouldn't exist anywhere in the world. And not only on the social policy aspect you need to act, so social protection as well, collective bargaining, but we also need to look at a different dimension. And I agree very much what the previous speaker said. We need to look at how the food chain works, and what are the imbalances that exist across the food chain. What is the power of retailers? What kind of power they play on small actors? What are the consequences of these imbalances on the most vulnerable actors, primarily small farmers, but then at the end also agricultural workers, that at the end of the day they pay the price of these imbalances. And then this is not enough. I must admit that this is not enough, because we also need to look at other aspects, like the financialization of the sector, the fact that we have more and more financial investors that are becoming attracted by the food sector. They are owning more and more share in food companies, in transnational companies. But also the dimension of international trade is absolutely crucial. It's true. Farmers face not only the competition, unfair competition across the food chain internally in Europe, but they also face unfair competition globally, if you want. And then, of course, I must also say that ensuring a fair prices for farmers, it's absolutely crucial. It's needed, but it's not enough. We have examples where there was an increase in the revenues of farmers, and this was not reflected in an improvement of working condition for agricultural workers. So we always have to keep this in mind as well, and we need to act really on different front, and we really need to renew, and we really need to promote a new vision for the whole food sector, the agro-food sector. And I think the Farm to Fork strategy report that has been adopted yesterday shows a bit this vision. I think there were good elements in it, also from a social dimension point of view. For example, the report clearly says that any kind of initiative in the framework of the Farm to Fork that will be adopted, any kind of legislative initiative, they need to have a social dimension as well. When it comes to transition to sustainable food and farming systems, we always need to take into consideration that from the social point of view, this is not only about skills. The Commission tends to speak a lot about skills. Just transition for workers is not only about skills, it's about social protection. It's about also carrying out rigorous impact assessment, also in terms of job creation and job destruction. It's about training, of course, but it's also about fostering collective bargaining and ensuring really decent condition for the people that produce and harvest our food.
Thank you, and hopefully we'll be able to move towards more of this vision. And I was really struck particularly by what you were saying about at the core, excuse me, at the core of this transition that we need to go through, that there needs to be a really strong social impact and dimension. And I think that really strikes to the heart of the ideas around just transition, particularly the Green Movement are attached to and wish to see. And I think that really, really is important, that we're not only, as you say, thinking about skills, but thinking about those protections the possibilities around employment opportunities, but also allowing that bargaining, collective bargaining, to take place within that. So thank you for sharing those thoughts, Enrico. This week's film really captures the sense of perhaps some of the economic challenges that I think all our speakers have spoken about, and the hardships faced by agricultural workers and farmers. And what I just want to do for you now is to show a clip from the film that we have that really captures the difficult kinds of conversations that many farmers are having around the financial viability of their food production. And this really focuses on the two main farmers who are within this film, and the conversation they are having about how viable it is for them to continue in this particular role. So we're now just going to have a look at this clip.
Ήρθαμε να λύσουμε πάλι τα άλυτα. Τα όνειρά μας. Πώς θα μπορέσουμε να αλλάξουμε τον κόσμο χωρίς να κάνουμε επανάσταση. Θεωρίες. Τέλος πάντων. Το φαντάζεσαι ότι μας έχουν εκλέψει τα όνειρα? Είναι ντροπή τα όνειρα να στηρίζονται μόνο στην οικονομία. Συμφωνείς?
Ναι. Αν η οικονομία δεν είναι όνειρό σου.
Εσένα είναι?
Όχι.
Ούτε και εμένα.
Οι γεωργοί ζουν κάτω από μια φοβερή ασφάλεια της τροφής.
Ό,τι και να γίνει, εγώ τουλάχιστον θα πεινάσω.
Οπότε ξέρεις πόσο δύσκολο είναι να γίνουν αλλαγές έτσι? Για να αλλάξει η γεωργία θα πρέπει να συνδεθεί με τις πόλεις. Αλλιώς δεν γίνεται. Αν δεν συνδεθεί η γεωργία με την κατανάλωση, δεν θα αλλάξει η γεωργία. Και το μέλλον της γεωργίας είναι στην ουσία η παραγωγή πρώτων υλών. Αυτό θα κάνουν οι γεωργοί.
Θα έρχεται δηλαδή.
Και στην παραγωγή πρώτων υλών δεν χρειάζεσαι γεωργούς, χρειάζεσαι χειριστές μηχανημάτων. Τόσο απλά είναι τα πράγματα.
Θα έρχεται η τάδε εταιρεία και θα σου λέει ότι εγώ θέλω να μου κάνεις ντομάτα. Ας πούμε, θα κάνει ντομάτα.
Τέτοια ντομάτα, συγκεκριμένη.
Με το συγκεκριμένο σπόρο της Μοσάντο που θα σου δώσω.
Συγκεκριμένο σπόρο, συγκεκριμένο βάρος, συγκεκριμένο χρώμα, συγκεκριμένο. Μόνο αυτό. Και μόνο αυτή μπορεί να την πάρει.
Πώς πείθεις τον καταναλωτή μετά να πάει να αγοράσει, να αφήσει την ντομάτα την Ιταλική που είναι μέσα στο βαζάκι που κάνει, ξέρω εγώ, 2,5 ευρώ και να αγοράσει την ελληνική, τη βιολογική που κυμαίνεται από 3 ευρώ και πάνω? Πώς τον πείθεις? Είναι θέμα παιδείας και εκεί. Αλλά είναι και θέμα τσέπης. Υπάρχει ένα μεγάλο εμπόδιο στο κόστος της παραγωγής των ποιοτικών προϊόντων, Αλέξανδρε.
Κάπως πρέπει να γίνει αρχή.
Κάπως πρέπει να γίνει αρχή.
So I think that clip really shows those really terribly difficult conversations that are happening around viability, and also thinking about how to deal with agriculture in an economic downturn as well. So if you want to see more of our film, of course, you can definitely check it out on the Green Screen website. So we have just had a question come in from our YouTube watchers, and this question, I believe, will be appearing on the screen very soon. And this question has come from MD, who has asked, how can we lessen the amount of high carbon footprint food exported to Europe, such as items like avocados, which I know are very popular at the moment? Thomas, can I bring you in on this question? What do you think is the answer to this?
Well, first of all, luckily there's avocados already grown in the European Union as well, but still they are high water consumers, so we need to watch out. Now, but let me take an example from actually another field of industry in the moment. We're going and we're intending and we're away on high carbon price on carbon emissions on, let's say, steel industry. The steel industry reacts very clearly with saying, well, look, if you're putting that kind of economical burden on us, you have to secure us from a competition from companies from abroad that are not covering or not have to cover the same costs of productions. So the European Union invented something called carbon border adjustment tax. In fact, it's a CO2 toll, but we just can't call it like that because of WTO treaty. And if you take the very same logic and transfer it to food, then the answer is pretty clear. We have to, first of all, change our own agricultural system so that it's less emitting carbon, or even maybe sequestering carbon into the soil. And then we have to look at imported products from that standpoint. Does that imported product meet the climate standards that we are approaching on our very own agriculture within the European Union? If yes, okay, then import. If not, you get an extra toll where we are calculating the amount of carbon footprint and we're putting an extra price on the importation. That would grant, first of all, a level playing field for our production. And there's very few things I sign up with COPA, the conventional farmers representation, is that they're tackling that they're saying, look, if we have more environmental standards, if we have higher social standards, work standards, and so on, we need to have a certain protection from imported products that are undercutting these standards. And for the moment, food, I think, is not in the proposals of the Commission when it comes to the border adjustment tax, but I think it should be. And it should not only tackle carbon, but it should also tackle the environmental destruction that is done by that production method. May it be soy planted on deforested Amazon land, or maybe palm oil again on deforested ancient forests, maybe in Indonesia and otherwhere, but also taking into account the social factor. Because I mean, where is the fairness in making sure that within Europe farm workers are paid in a correct way, have social security and so on, but then the production has to compete on the same level with the production coming from abroad, where farm workers do not get a proper income and have no social security at all. So we need to have measurements to guarantee a level playing field there. And this is also going to have an effect also on the production abroad, because Europe is the most profitable market for food in the world. So there's a big attractivity for producers across the planet. And through setting these standards and demanding these standards, we can also influence production going more socially just, more environmentally friendly, and more climate and CO2 neutral.
Thank you very much, Thomas. And Enrico, I wonder if I could ask you, what do you feel that the impact is on agro-food workers when it comes to competing with food production from abroad? Do you think that there's particular risks when we have these kind of discussions?
Yes, we have a huge risk. As I said before, we have to deal with the unfair competition across the food chain, but also with the unfair competition that exists globally. And I think that the European Union has a huge power and can use really trade deals as a leverage to try to increase environmental and social standards abroad. And in this respect, they should first of all align the EU agenda on international trade with the objectives of the EU Green Deal and the Farm to Fork strategy. That's the first thing to do, because it's not enough to set ambitious targets at EU level if at the end of the day the rest of the world is keeping on the same path. This doesn't make any sense, and we cannot achieve any kind of sustainable food and farming system if we don't look also at what is happening outside of the European Union. And that means also being very attentive when it comes to trade agreements like the Mercosur agreement, which would be a major driver for deforestation and would be an agreement that we are going to sign with countries that have social standards which are much lower. So from a trade union perspective, we believe that agro-food in general should be considered really attentively when it comes to free trade agreements. We have the impression that the agro-food sector, it's used a bit as a bargaining chip to sell more cars or to sell more products of other sectors. And this is something that we cannot really accept. And then the second thing that we are always campaigning on is the fact that the ratification or even entering into negotiation on free trade agreements should not happen if the counterpart has not only ratified but also implemented up-to-date ILO conventions and also really advanced social standards. This must be a precondition to enter into negotiation. And if the partners has not done it, then they need to bind themselves to a binding path that ensure that they are going to ratify those conventions and the highest social standard, also looking not only at the ILO convention, but the EU social acquis that exists at European level at the moment. We have always these trade and sustainable development chapters, which are even quite advanced sometimes, but they are not binding. And this is a major problem when it comes to free trade agreements. So this is a leverage that we can have really to increase and improve working conditions and environmental standards in other parts of the world, and at the same time avoid that we suffer unfair competition from an environmental point of view and a social point of view here in Europe. But this is not happening because, as I said, food is always used as a bargaining chip to promote and to support other sectors. And if we keep like this, if really we keep like this, then we are going to harm, and we are already doing it, we are going to harm the agricultural sector in Europe, and we will go even more towards the situation that we heard before about Bulgaria. We will go even more towards this process of concentration that exists at each and every level of the food chain. It exists at fertilizer level, it exists in the agrochemical level, it exists in the food processing industry, it exists at farmer level, and it exists at retailer level. So the bigger become bigger and bigger, and the smaller they are going to die. And this is really something that we need to overturn, because it's the only way to ensure really that we go towards a more sustainable agriculture and food system.
Thank you very much, Enrico. Some really, really important points there, because obviously when we have discussions around these particular trade deals, one of the biggest worries that exists is around about maintaining those food standards and maintaining those work and labour standards, and to ensure that they are part of those discussions, as you say, to ensure that the agricultural sector is not kind of traded in favour of other sectors as well. And Geneviève, I wonder if I could bring you onto this topic as well, and ask your perspective on whether you feel that this importing of goods from outside of the EU does present a threat, if you like, towards agricultural workers. But also in terms of trade deals, do you feel that farmers are actually getting a fair deal through them, and in terms of exports as well?
I will put it another way around. In fact, I would go a bit further than what my previous speakers said, that and this is our point of view, the situation has already been bad for years. In fact, since the creation of the WTO, that put agriculture in free trade agreements, and that really changed the situation for farmers, and especially for small-scale farmers that we are representing at the Campesina level. And we've always been fighting against this, because it is really destroying peasantry and small-scale food production. So this is really what we are fighting against, this vision that only trade is going to solve the problems of everything, problems of access to food, problems of economy. No. So this is, we're not only asking for fair trade deals, we're asking for trade deals that, well, to be able to stop trade deals if they don't help us to have a better life, and to have this possibility to have a policy that forbid exports, imports, or that protects the farmers really from this kind of vision of agriculture really based on trade and import. And this is really what we call food sovereignty, and this is what we've been developing over the years. The right for peasants, for communities to decide on their food systems and to organize the policies to let it happen, to make it happen, and to be able to have a sustainable farming, sustainable food production, and not to be always oriented towards, yes, but like you said, only trade policy and the DJ trade, the trade in Europe is far too important in the vision of the policies. This is, it seems to be the most important thing. And of course, at the end of the day, the farmers don't necessarily get a fair deal, and they are not happy with it. We're speaking more for small farmers that are dealing with internal markets. We don't care that much about external, about exports, about this is not where we get our income from. We need to be able to sell locally, but to sell locally, we don't have to be dumped with products from any parts of the world that are so cheap that you cannot compete, and you cannot you cannot stay in the business. And this is the same which happens in different countries. Like when people from Bulgaria, for instance, entered Europe, entered the European Union, it was big competitions coming from Western countries through supermarkets sometimes, because the supermarkets that started to be built in Romania, Bulgaria, came from Germany, from France. You have Carrefour, which opens a supermarket, and then they import the food, and then the local farmers can't sell their products anymore. So this is all the situation of a kind of this is what a vision of farming, agriculture, and food based on trade. This is what it brings to the people: poverty, and at the end, the farmers have to quit. In Romania, for instance, a lot of farmers had to quit the land, and they are employed in larger companies in Western agricultural farms or businesses. So this is also the system, and this is why for us trade is it exists. We need, well, there is trade, but we want to focus on first the need for people to access good food and as much as possible produce locally. So it's, I don't know if I really answered your question, but I think we have to see trade the other way around. At the moment, we seem to be producing for trade, when trade should be a support, but not the core of the food system. Especially with finance being completely included in it, like Enrico said, that with finance trying to get, and finance and with the capitalist system and investors trying to get as much as possible from the system, they don't bother about food, they bother about business, and this is not sustainable.
Thank you very much, Geneviève. I think it's really important to kind of examine those kind of questions that we're asking around that, and to say, should trade be a focus when it comes to agriculture, particularly if we're trying to encourage more of a localized approach. And finally, to kind of round off this little discussion that we've been having about trade, I wonder, Thomas, if I can come to you to offer your thoughts as a similar question that I asked Geneviève. Do you feel food producers are getting a fair deal, and do you perhaps agree with Geneviève that the questions that we should ask are not only about trade and trade deals, but should it be more focusing on more localized production as an aim and goal, rather than trying to produce for an export market?
Well, farmers do usually not get a fair share. Just look at their income. They're under the lowest incomes of the European Union, except the very few, maybe 3, 4, 5% big ones. And not just in Europe, it's the same abroad. And I stand for a political direction that tries to reorient our agricultural system as we have it in Europe, and also our public support towards a focus on European production, European fundings for European farmers to produce food, basically and mainly aimed for European citizens on a high quality, a healthy standard with high sustainability, environmentally friendly, climate friendly. That's what we should use taxpayers' money for, because taxpayers' money needs to support the common good, and the common good cannot be destroying our landscapes, flooding our streams with nitrate, and so on and so forth. I also very much stand for a position on taking food out of WTO treaty, taking food out of global free trade regimes. Because it's not just about Europe in that competition. We can stand the competition. We can compensate with billions of taxpayers' money. But what we're doing actually with that is we're producing food or products like milk powder or even partly chicken parts, which are not well sold. We're producing produce for dumping prices, which then due to overproduction, we need to get rid of somewhere. And so it's not just about our own market, but we're also destroying agricultural markets abroad. We're destroying markets in Africa, as an example, with cheap milk powder, with cheap chicken wings, where actually that leads to the farmers there not being able to sell their goods. So not just Bulgaria, but also abroad. And we're destroying their agricultural production and directly fueling poverty and directly fueling also hunger, because this dependency then on imports and the lack of local production sovereignty of all of these countries. So if we talk about food sovereignty within EU, it's also very much about food sovereignty abroad, so allowing every country to define their food markets, their food production, but also to protect their farmers and their food markets against cheap imports. So it's a concept that has been talked about a lot like 10, 15 years ago, but I really think we should restart the debate on what are we not just doing to our own farmers, but also to developing countries, least developing countries, directly causing poverty, fueling the slums, and endangering food sovereignty of these countries. So trade agreements, and I can just confirm what we've heard in the trade agreements. The agricultural goods are bargaining chips. That's exactly it. And the profits of export, they are not ending up at the farms. They are taken by multinational companies, often the same companies importing goods and exporting goods. That's where the revenues stay. The farmers, they get the crumbles at the end, and even that's not enough for most of us to live from. So either we find niches like direct marketing, which is, I would say, an encouraging development across Europe to build on, but for many of our colleagues, they can't sustain their farms under this very unfair and very destructive concurrency and competition, also linked very much to trade agreements and global markets.
Thank you very much, Thomas. And I think this is a discussion that we can only continue to have today. And I don't think we'll be able to solve all of these issues in one go. But certainly, thank you for offering these particular thoughts, and really encourage us to rethink those questions that we might ask about trade. And to consider not only the social aspect of trade, but if we are trying to seek a localization, to see if we should not have so much focus on production for purely export and trade as well. So we're now just going to show, to wrap up this section before we turn to some comments and questions that we've had from the audience, we're now just going to show the moment in our film this week when our tomato produce workers from Greece actually see their products in the store in Brussels and get a bit of a sense of realization of what is happening when their food is taken and sold in shops and what that actually looks like. So we're now just going to take a look at this short clip.
Τα γνωρίζετε αυτά?
This is your products. Αυτά είναι.
Δικά μας.
Exactly. So you are the one who pick up the tomatoes, right? In the fields.
And then we make all the...
You make the whole thing?
Oh, yeah.
And nobody else is producing this tomato?
No. Ilias is a village, 33 people live there.
Oh.
And the half of them work with us, It's like a big family, My aunt Katina is 82 years old.
82?
Yes. Δεν είναι πάρα πολύ εντυπωσιακό πάντως?
Και να έρθεις να τα δεις εδώ πέρα. Είναι όλα αυτά τα κουτιά πέρασαν από τα χέρια μας.
Και κάνουν 5 και 99.
6 ευρώ. Το ένα.
Το ένα.
Κοίτα να δεις όμως, αυτό είναι μια μερίδα.
Ναι,
μια μερίδα φαγητού βιολογικό.
So that's a beautiful moment, I think, of the film as well, where they get to actually see the spoils of their work and see it within the store as well. And don't forget, you can check out When Tomatoes Met Wagner on the Green Screen website, and you can still stream it after the session. So to finish off for today, we're now going to turn to a couple of questions that we've had come in on our social media. And the first question that we've had comes in from one of our Instagram users, and this is through our channels at the European Greens. And this question is asking, how can we encourage established farmers to diversify their farms and rent small bits of land to new farmers so they can get started? So Geneviève, I wonder if I could turn to you to offer your thoughts on this question.
Yes, it's difficult. It's a difficult issue. This question to have access to land through this kind of system. What I've noticed in that film is also how joyful the people are, how important the social aspect is. When you have this kind of smaller farms, then you can have better social life in the villages. And I hope people are going to understand that, and so be more willing to welcome young farmers, newcomers, new entrants into the business, into farming. So I think it's getting a kind of atmosphere that you realize that it's more important to have neighbors than to have hectares. So I think it is a mindset that has to change and to evolve. And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. It depends where you are. I'm in a happy village, but sometimes it's not so happy. But I hope it spreads, and it gives the idea for young people to start farms, and for the older ones to let a little of their farms. But let's hope and try.
And I definitely hope we can achieve that as well. And thank you very much for your answer there. And we're also going to take another question that we've had on social media. So this is, if we improve the food system and start growing the food we consume in Europe, can we make the food sector a good choice as a professional sector for younger generations? And Enrico, I wanted to turn to you to answer this question. What are your thoughts in response to this?
Well, thank you very much, Sam. I would say that it wouldn't be enough. That would be my first question. I think that improving the food system, then first of all, we need to understand what does it mean. If we start improving our trade policy, really ensuring that agriculture is protected and working conditions are protected, and that we really use trade policy as a way also to improve environmental and social standards abroad. And we pay a lot of attention when it comes to agriculture, also limiting trade if needed when it comes to agriculture. If we address the imbalances in the food chain, if we address shareholder value maximization, then this is a good starting point, but it's not enough. Because if I am a young person and I want to start a career in the agriculture sector, in the food sector, what I'm looking forward is about stability, is about good working conditions. It's about ensuring that I have an encouraging and an attractive career path. And to have it, it means that I need to have a good working condition, a good wage that ensure that I can take care of myself and my family. It means that I have good collective bargaining agreements, that my right to organize and bargain collectively is respected. And to achieve that, we still need to do a lot more. We still need to act on the social dimension. We need to increase the level of inspections in agriculture, but also in food processing. We need to address problems that we have with respect to subcontracting, still in the meat sector, for example, or in other sectors of the food chain. We need to ensure, for example, that we tackle gang master practices or illegal intermediators that exist a lot in agriculture. So there are still a lot of things that have to be done. We need to ensure social security and social protection. It's not acceptable that a country like Germany still nowadays allow seasonal workers to not be covered by social security for 70 days during the summer period, during the harvesting period. This is happening in Germany. That means that if they fell sick, they cannot even avoid going to work because they would lose their wage. So, as I said before, we need to act on the sector, looking at the food chain, how it works, look at the externalities, international trade, etc. But then also always looking at the social policy aspect, the social rights, workers' rights, collective bargaining rights as well. This is the way to make the sector really attractive and to avoid what we are facing now at the moment, that we have many young people that are actually leaving the sector because the sector is not attractive. Also, people with qualification, with skills, they leave the sector after a while to go to other sectors that are better remunerated and where the conditions are better. And this, we have huge turnover rate in food and agriculture, particularly in some countries. This has to be tackled. really with this double approach: the food chain, how it works, and working conditions, social conditions as well.
And thank you very much for your answer. And it seems like there is a lot of work to be done to indeed make the sector more attractive for younger workers to engage with that as well. So I just want to say a huge thank you to our panelists, to Geneviève, to Enrico, and for Thomas for your contributions in today's really fascinating discussion. And I think today this conversation is only continuing what has been happening at the moment. And I think as we continue to recover across Europe and food production systems hopefully will be started to shape in different ways that you've described. And certainly it's worth keeping an eye on the food to fork strategy that is coming out at the moment. Please remember you can still watch our film, When Tomatoes Met Wagner, this evening. So you can grab your popcorn. I've been given my special limited edition popcorn box for the green screen. I do have a little bit of microwave popcorn as well. So I'm going to watch the film again because it was that good. So I'm going to get my popcorn up. And make sure that you check the movie out and watch it. And if you have any particular thoughts about it, feel free to share them with us via the European Green Party Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram channels. So a very huge thank you to our panelists for joining us today. We will be back next month. We're going to be exploring the topic of protecting citizens' rights and democracy. And very shortly, we will be announcing the selected movie that we have. And trust me, it is one not to miss. All of our films are so wonderful in tackling a lot of these particular issues, but definitely stick around because I think that not only does When Tomatoes Met Wagner give you a wonderful insight, our next film coming up is going to be something special as well. So a big thank you again to our panel, to all of the team who have helped pull things together behind the scenes for tonight's panel, and see you next time. Stay safe and stay healthy. Good night.